Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that you and your family and your friends have been safe, and I hope that if not, that you guys find that safety and security in the very near future. There's a ton of stuff that has been happening over the last 96 hours. So I do want to apologize. We were not live there on Wednesday. I had some personal things going on, and I just wasn't going to be able to do this. I just have things that, times where I just can't do this. Everyone kind of needs a break from this for a bit. As I'm sure you can imagine, it's not exactly joyful to go through a lot of this stuff. And so I just decided that it probably wasn't best, and I wasn't in the best state mentally to be able to do that. So from someone with experience with this quite often, it's always very important. Please make sure that you guys are taking care of your mental health. So it's very important you guys are doing that, and that if you do need to take a break, please do so. And if you need help and need to talk to people, please do so. It's always a better thing than trying to keep it all inside there for you. But outside of that, there has been a lot of developments in the news, as I'm sure you can tell by our later start time, and a lot of stuff that is being has been pinpointed here on the news board, here on the map. And a lot of this stuff has to do with a lot of human suffering, a lot of really bad things that are happening to people all throughout the world. A lot of people, millions of people impacted by these issues. And so the whole point of this channel is to inform you on what is happening throughout the world, but also to give you the opportunity to give back, to give to the people that are suffering as a result of the different situations here on the channel. And so please be sure to check out the video description below where you're going to see a ton of different organizational links down there. 70% of more of all the donations that those organizations in the description do receive go directly to their programs, meaning go directly to helping people, with 30% or less going to things like salaries and administration's costs. So please be sure to check them all out. They cover the whole globe. If you have more organizations, please get them over to us. Please let a staff member know. We're constantly looking to add to that list and start to improve upon that vetting process as well, so that way we can get more and more organizations to cover every inch of this globe at some point. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things you can do is help us grow as a channel. Our goal here is to be able to put a fundraiser on every single stream that we do, every single time we go live, and every single video that we do, to help raise money for people that are impacted by this. And the only way we can do that is once we continue to grow this channel and we get big enough to be able to do so. And so please, those likes and subscribes, sharing this amongst your friends and community, so the more people that see this, the more people that come here, the more people that are able to donate to these causes into helping these people, but also the more we can do as a channel itself. And you guys have been an amazing community. I've loved seeing the growth that we have done here, and I can't wait to see where it goes here into the future. And so thank you very much for the support, and we hope that that support will just continue to grow as we continue going forward. Now, if you are new here and you are watching live with us tonight, please feel free as we go through the news to ask questions in the live chat. I am watching the live chat, as I am every single night. I already see that we, of course, have an Army Commander Conscriptovich meme that has now popped up into our chat, as I always expect for the night. And I hope that you guys do ask some questions, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Now, to give you a little bit of background on myself, if you may be new here, I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020, and I was an O-352 anti-tank missileman, and I was also a corporal with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines out of 29 Palms, California. I did 2 tours to the Middle East. My first tour between October of 2017 to March of 2018. I spent the majority of my time in the country of Syria as part of Operation Inherent Resolve, where I was supporting, and I was attached to Special Operations Forces and coalition partners there in the northeastern part of Syria, and I was fighting against the Islamic State, as well as providing security and stabilization efforts there in the northeastern part of Syria and Deir ez-Zor and Al-Hasaka provinces. After that, came back to the United States. I ended up running an armory within my company for about a year and a half, 2 years, before we redeployed back to the Middle East, this time between October of 2019 and March of 2020. And I spent the majority of my time in the country of Kuwait. I was the Javelin team leader for the for the crisis response company. But on New Year's of 2020, I actually went to the Baghdad embassy complex when it was attacked by over 4,000 protesters and Katiba's Hezbollah militants. I spent about a month and a half there, providing, of course, putting down the protests that were outside, trying to keep them and resecuring that embassy. And I also provided all of the, I was in charge of all anti-armor operations around the embassy compound and pretty much in Baghdad at that point. From there, I went to Saudi Arabia and down into the Red Sea, where I trained Saudi Arabian Marines preparing to deploy to the country of Yemen. And from there, I went back home and I ended up getting out of the Marine Corps. So I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I'm also a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a fully cross-trained rifleman, a partially cross-trained radio operator, as well as a CLS or Combat Lifesaver certified Marine, meaning I have received additional medical training on top of what most Marines will receive, as well as also having battlefield experience for providing aid to real-world casualties. And I'm also an expert in logistics. I am a logistical coordinator in the commercial sector these days. And I also have interests in other things. So I have interests in things that I do not claim to be an expert in, such as geopolitics, science, geography, human geography, sociology, and the basic history is a huge one for me. But I am not an expert in any of those. Doesn't matter though, because expert or not, I always implore that you, as a viewer, please do your own research. And if you do want a starting point, please feel free to jump on here and use the maps as a reference. Our maps are available on our website. They're uploaded before every single stream, so you can follow along with the stream if you would like, or you can go ahead and go back through. And if we find any associated articles with the topics we're talking about for a night that comes from another credible news source, we will end up also attaching those so that you can do some further reading. So please be sure to go and check it out. And also all of the donation links are listed on there within different categories on our website, as well as some news articles. So with all of those intro things done, without further ado, we can finally jump into the actual news itself. And there is a lot of news, to be sure. So we actually jump down here, and of course we start off with our special report coming out of here in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it would appear that Ivanpil was shelled again. Ivanpil, in the city of Ivanpil, a school was damaged after Russian artillery struck nearby. Likely no casualties were reported. The region continues to be a target for indiscriminate artillery bombardments. Schools and educational establishments are protected under the 1949 Geneva Conventions and its associated additional protocols. We do see some superficial damage to that, mostly blown out windows, and of course some structural damage on the outside of the building. So, unfortunately, a lot of educational establishments have been destroyed, and we actually can kind of get into that here as we move into Kyiv. And we get our UN casualty update, and this is the United Nations Human Rights Council, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, in fact, actually going through, and they are actually verifying civilian casualty numbers. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, or OHCHR, has recorded 8,101 deaths and 13,479 injuries to civilians in Ukraine. That's based on their approximation. They go further into this on their official Twitter. So between 24 February 2022 and 26 February of this year, at least 8,101 people have been killed, which does include at least 488 children. At least 13,479 people have been injured, including 962 children. And they do give a caveat on every single one of these, and they do say actual figures are much higher. Meaning even the United Nations does recognize that they are going through and they are verifying these, but these are not the actual casualty numbers. It's just what the United Nations is tallying up at this point, and can verify and collaborate their stories to be able to actually put all of this together and verify what has happened. Unfortunately, though, we do continue to see the child casualty updates and some other news associated with it. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian occupiers have forcibly deported more than 16,000 Ukrainian children to the Russian Federation. This comes from the Prosecutor General's office. And the deportation of children from one group to another group, even if based off of national lines, is actually a crime of genocide, according to the 1949 Geneva Conventions, as well as the 1993 Rome Statute, which further outlines genocide within its context. Second quote we have here, quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 461 Ukrainian children have died. 930 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region. And finally, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian troops have destroyed about 101 objects of youth infrastructure in Ukraine. That's coming from Marina Papatenko, who is the Deputy Minister of Youth and Sports of Ukraine. So unfortunately, that war continues to ravage on, and it impacts every single person. Bookham 40 already asked you a question. Bakhmut, should they stay or should they go? We will get to that here in a moment. We're getting ready to roll in here into the front lines as you're talking down here. And we actually start off here in the Luhansk Oblast, just across the border. This is in the city of Kadivka, which we know has been used as a military staging point for the Russian Federation for some time now. It would appear that yet another ammunition depot was destroyed in the city of Kadivka. The familiar sound of ammunition cooking off and following the sounds of large explosions really gives that telltale sign of what has happened in this city. Yet another ammunition depot destroyed. Nuclear is asking what happened to his commander. Well, I wanted to have a lead into this one tonight, Nuclear, and that's because I believe that Army Commander, Conscriptovich's command post may have been located in Kadivka, if you couldn't hear. That other small explosions that you're hearing there is the sound of a cook-off. That is ammunition that has become so hot that it is now so hot inside of its casing that it is it is causing the gunpowder or whatever the ignition source is for that ammunition to detonate. It is so hot that it is now detonating. It is immediately catching fire and therefore exploding. It's something that happens if you throw ammunition into a fire. They eventually heat up to the point they just start shooting, and these aren't being put into a chamber of a barrel or for a rifle or a breech for an artillery gun. So these things aren't directed anywhere. These things are going, while at slower velocities than normal, but these are going to go in every which direction, which makes it incredibly dangerous for anybody that will be nearby. But coming from Nuclear, can we do something about those HIMARS now? Five HIMARS hit my frontline command post. That's 50 miles behind the front. Coming from Army Commander Conscriptovich. Talking about the much longer range munitions that are being fired, and that we're seeing quite a lot of hits deep into territory, even including down here in Crimea. Further, Army Commander Conscriptovich, quote, says, the additional explosives are just popcorn. Don't ask me why the troops put it next to the microwave. Very well. Down here in Chasiv Yar, a school and residential buildings were damaged in shelling. Another school and several residential buildings have been damaged as a result of Russian forces selling the city of Chasiv Yar in the Donetsk region. Luckily, there have been no civilian casualties. Coming from Pavel Kolenko, the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. Once again, schools are protected. The city of Bakhmut continues to see a very heavy fighting, and this is a large number, actually a very large force of Russian troops that are trying to encircle the city of Bakhmut itself. Roughly between 30 and 35,000 Ukrainian troops and roughly 40 to 45,000 Russian troops are embattled within a 23-mile-long sector of the front lines that extends here from Belhorivka down to about Zaitsev. And we see that it's centered around Bakhmut, with the northern flank for the Ukrainians actually having collapsed over the last about a month or so. A little over a month, I'd say. And so the Russians are tightening the noose. There's only one entrance and exit into the city of Bakhmut, but it has been very costly. They are going forward, although Wagner Group is using wave attacks against very heavily defended trench lines by the Ukrainians. It is World War I in the 21st century. The conditions are almost exactly the same as what you would expect to find in the fields of Flanders there in the Netherlands, or what you may have expected down there in Verdun. And what we're seeing here is that these very well dug, very well fortified defensive trench lines with wave style attacks that oftentimes result in very close quarters and hand to hand combat has been very brutal for both sides, but the Russians especially, as according to Alexei Danilov, who's the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, quote, in battles for Bakhmut and the Donetsk region, Russian aggressors have been losing 7 times as many soldiers as the armed forces of Ukraine. We do not talk very heavily when it comes in regards of civilian, or when it comes into regards of military casualties here on the battlefield. And the reason for that is because there is an information war being waged. So Ukraine, whether purposefully or not, is likely going to be inflating numbers to a degree. I'm seeing a lot of people talking about how they've hit 150,000. It could be much lower than that. It could be much higher than that. It really doesn't. We will not know. We do not know. We likely will never know, aside from some general approximations. If you look, historically speaking, without the intent to do so, American forces, from battle damage assessments on the ground during the Gulf War and the Iraq War, we would have killed the Iraqi army seven times over in its entirety if you went by battlefield commanders claiming kills. In fact, even German tank commanders and tank unit commanders destroyed Russian or Soviet tanks at the time by upwards of over 70%, meaning that even though the claims were they had killed that many would actually be returned to action, and it wasn't a true actual determination factor for them. You cannot go by what your battlefield commanders are claiming. You have to go by what you are like, or what the actual reality is probably going to be, and that's significantly lower. In fact, many troops that are wounded are actually going to be returned to duty in a relatively short time. So, while yes, 7 times the losses is very possible, considering what we've seen the Russians being doing here, it is something to still maintain skeptical about, especially when you're looking at casualty rates. Roughly, according to the mathematical ways of doing this, including if you go by the Love's Doctrine, which is for the United Kingdom's way of going through and calculating casualties per day for warfare per unit of whatever size. In general, it boils down very much oversimplified and not an exact science, but it boils down to that Ukraine should be taking roughly 2/3 of the losses the Russians should be in this kind of warfare, in a battle of attrition, for equal amounts of units, because the Russians are on the attacking and the Ukrainians are on the defending against a very heavily fortified position. Plus, you're also talking about urban terrain, which can actually increase that by up to 80% casualties within any given unit. Now, that goes back to Bookham 40, who is saying, Bakhmut, should they stay or should they go? And that is the thing. That's a matter of opinion, depending on how you look at it. I don't think anyone in Bakhmut would really appreciate it if the Ukrainians just left the city. It's pretty, I don't think they, after everything that the Russians have subjected Bakhmut to, which we've reported, I want to say, at least 9 different times just on this channel. We've documented just on this channel 9 separate occasions where incendiary munitions in the form of 9S-22M Grad incendiary rockets were used against the city of Bakhmut, not including indiscriminate shelling. So I don't think the Ukrainians there would be much obliged. The actual civilians left, which there are hundreds of them, would be very much happy if the Ukrainians left. from a personal point of view, Bakhmut, I think, the Russians are successful in one thing so far in this war, and I think that is successfully fixing Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. Bakhmut strategically really isn't all that important. It was much earlier in the war, and it makes sense that the Russians were going for it earlier in the war, during the battles of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, and right afterwards when they actually had Liman and had the ability, really their only opportunity to take the Donetsk Oblast in one good sweep. And they failed to do that because the counteroffensives that we see happening here in Kharkiv completely destroy any chance of that happening. So Bakhmut loses its importance, and we really don't see, we're not going to see a huge change on the battlefield if Ukraine withdraws. So it is smarter for the Ukrainians to withdraw, in my personal opinion. Because it's very... If you try to defend every single point, you will lose all of them. That's kind of that's really the key to war in some cases on battlefield success is you can't defend absolutely everything. You'll spread yourself out too thin. You won't be able to have, you won't be able to maneuver forces nearly as well. If everything is important, then none of it's important. If all mail is listed as priority mail, then all of it just becomes mail. So the mentality that a battlefield commander should have is, what are the key strategic points? The Russians turned this no longer key strategic point into a fixing position, and both sides now have really engaged into a much bigger battle than really it needed to be, because the Ukrainians kept dumping troops into Bakhmut. The Russians continued to dump more troops and equipment into Bakhmut, and suddenly, instead of couple thousand troops in this sector of the front line, there's now 40,000, upwards of almost 100,000 troops that could be fighting in this sector of the front line between both sides. And that is astronomical given how much more of the front lines there are. Talk about the open plains down here in the Zaporizhia Oblast, or you're talking about the drive from, Huliopol down, or not Huliopol down to, coming down to Mariupol. There's a lot more to this war that just it doesn't have any focus to it. They really fixed them really well. And now they're partially encircled, which is nothing the Ukrainians haven't done before. We know the 93rd Mechanized Brigade's operating there, and they've been partially encircled numerous times now, and won. But it just, considering the conditions and the losses, it would be bittersweet. I definitely can understand that. But this isn't key. This isn't strategically key to the battlefield. Nothing in the big picture, nothing changes if Bakhmut changes hands. You successfully destroyed tens of thousands of Russian troops and equipment for something that isn't necessarily going to be super beneficial to them. It is now more territory that they have to defend. And we see how that went. So it's my personal opinion. He follows it up with, how many Wagner troops are left? Can't be many. The Wagner group is much larger than you think. They operate internationally, and they have forces that are operating in Syria right now. They have troops that are operating in Mali right now. They have troops operating everywhere in the world. The Wagner group is very, very diverse. And the thing is that they are supplementing manpower, meaning that the Wagner group is taking troops, or they are troops that are supplementing the Russian army in their lack of manpower. So Yevgeny Prigozhin's probably got a very lucrative contract, but for, of course he's a Russian oligarch, so he's going to get that anyway. But he is able, where the Russians' army will not conscript from a prison, Yevgeny Prigozhin can, because everything Yevgeny Prigozhin does is clandestine and under the table as far as the Russians are concerned. So he's able to get a lot more forces that in other circumstances, the army wouldn't take them. The army doesn't even want them. But Yevgeny Prigozhin does, and the Wagner Group does, because they either do what they say and get killed in combat, and have a small chance of success in their mission, or they don't succeed, or they retreat, or they do something terrible that, murder or whatever, of another Russian soldier or what have you, or they retreat, and then the Wagner Group shoots them because they're prisoners, and many of them violent prisoners, and Russia doesn't care because they were in prison anyway, so now it just costs them less to feed and maintain them. It's one of those things. Think about all the Blackwater scandals, and that pretty much sums up like the entire business model of the Wagner Group. Minus the actually good at their job part. And no, there is no like key terrain. But the intense fighting for Bakhmut does continue, and we do talk about it here. The fighting, the crescendo continues to grow, and the President Zelensky has said numerous times he does not intend to give up Bakhmut, despite a lot of pressure on him to do so. Do you have some footage coming out today?
Опа, увидел, пацаны, где РПГ? А ну, иди сюда, Антон. А ну, аккуратно.
Ты въебал?
Да.
Заебись. Заряжай вторую.
Да не... О, я перчатку свою нашел, пацаны.
А это отметка прилетела. Сразу, моментально.
Я нашел перчатку, а где они были, ебать?
Вон наверху их перчатка. На дверях.
Ебать, я долбоеб. Опа, хорошая ответочка, да? Бля, разбирают нам.
Вот если они так хуярят, значит кого-то или за 300 или за 200.
100%, пацаны, слышь? Они могут сейчас...
Не за 300 они так не хуярят. А когда по ним, блядь, уебало нахуй кого-то из них, они в ответку как бешеные бьют тогда, блядь.
Конечно. Слушай, короче, смотрите, пацаны, они на штурм идут под обстрелами, так что давайте. Фу, блядь.
We continue on here as we take a look. General Staff of Ukraine. These guys firing their mortars here. This is in the vicinity of Bakhmut. Apparently low-flying Ukrainian Su-25s near Bakhmut, bringing in some close air support. And here's a very powerful photo. So this is a field hospital, in Bakhmut, treating the wounded here coming in from the front lines. And it's very telling. This is something that people don't talk about. It doesn't, in the eyes of many, this doesn't have the fast-paced action of a of the battlefield. But in reality, this is, I'd say, equally, if not more crucial than the battles themselves. If anyone's seen the beginning of Patton, you don't win then you would know the line. You don't win a war by dying for your country. You win it by making the other poor bastard die for his. There's some of the Georgian partisans here in Bakhmut.
ეს არის ქალაქი ბახმუტი. 3 მარტია დღეს. ყველას ქართველებს დედების დღეს გილოცავთ. აი, ჩამოვედით ქართველი პარტიზანები. ქალაქის გასაწმენდ. გიძინი! ქართველი პარტიზანები ქალაქ ბახმუტში როგორც ყოველთვის. ალი როგორ ახარ? კიევის ტიქტოკერები კიევში ძმაო.
Где фейсбуковский тигры?
ჩემო საქართველო, არავინ მოგატყუოთ, ბახმუტი ჩვენია, ვაკონტროლებთ. ყველა ქართველ დედას გილოცავთ დედების დღეს. შემოგევლეთ. პარტიზანები აქ ვართ.
So obviously they're out and about, and obviously you can hear the massive amount of artillery being used. And that's not the only thing that interesting that happened here along this front line. Reportedly, an Su-34 was shot down. A Russian Su-34 fullback fighter bomber was reportedly shot down near the occupied village of Yanakiv, here in the Donetsk Oblast, by Ukrainian forces, their air defense forces. According to the Ukrainian Air Force, air defense forces managed to bring down that aircraft.
Интересно, как там пассажиры сдохли?
Конечно.
У него нет парашюта? Как? Она приближается!
Не ходи!
For the look of that aircraft, it's a very flat one.
Взорвался самолет после падения спустя минут 10. Блин, он тут рядом совсем, но мы тут не проедем. Это вот он за этим полем упал просто.
There's a really good photo coming from the Ukrainian Air Force of that jet going down. So yeah, another very valuable aircraft. The Su-34 didn't actually enter service with the Ukrainian Air Force, or with the Su-34 didn't enter service with the Russian Air Force until 2014. So it's one of the newer aircraft that the Russians are actually fielding here in the conflict, and it's very limited in its numbers. Coming here from Donetsk, from the whole Donetsk Oblast now. We have our latest daily Donetsk update coming from Pavel Kolenko, the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. He says that, quote, on March 2nd, number of victims of the Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 2 killed, 5 injured. This coming out of the graphic released at 8 a.m. this morning local time, covering the last 24 hours of activity. In Velkia Novosilka, 2 people were killed. In Bakhmut, 3 were injured. In Krasnoarivka, 1 was injured. In Zalzhne, at least 1 was injured. In total, since February the 24th of last year, 1,394 civilians in the Donetsk Oblast have been killed, with an additional 3,119 injured. Now keep in mind, this does not include other parts of the region that are currently under occupation, such as Volnovakha or Mariupol, where we know that tens of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed as a result of the Battle of Mariupol, now residing in multiple mass grave sites scattered in and around the city and the region. The battle for Volodar continues, or should I say the Volodar massacre, because that's really what it has turned into for the Russian forces. Entire companies of Russian forces have been completely annihilated. Battalions now at this level, completely annihilated. Their troops and equipment destroyed and in complete disrepair and in irrecoverable losses of manpower. And this is largely before they even have an attempt, even an ability to engage Ukrainian actual defensive positions and get into a decent engagement with them. Most of the time, they're completely destroyed outright, with their fields, with literal fields of tanks and armored vehicles laying abandoned, rusting, and burning hulks in the middle of nowhere. The largest, according to the New York Times, who's been reporting there from Volodar, or has been reporting on Volodar rather heavily, according to the New York Times, the largest tank engagement of the entire war has taken place around Volodar, with hundreds of vehicles on both sides taking part. Both sides fielded large mechanized forces, including heavy tank brigades, that ended up engaging each other, reportedly with a loss of over 130 different armored vehicles on the part of the Russian Federation. And this is, at this point, what we're thinking is going to be the largest, so far actually, that would be the largest tank engagement of the 21st century. This is coming from a Russian soldier, or rather a Russian tanker. He is recording a video as his tank is burning in the background.
Всем передай привет. Лежу в разрыве. Андрюху спасли с джиды. 2 дня уже раненый лежит в ногу. Все нормально, перебинтовал. Укол поставил. Экипаж мой самый охуевший тут. Лежит, отдыхает.
Слава России!
Все, слава России, базара нет. Это мой танк горит, догорает. Сейчас минут через 30 БК начнет ебать. Мины летают. О, прилетел. Нормально все. Всем большой привет. С передовой прямо из прямых уст. Что здесь творится? Здесь пиздец. Но мы давим. Нихуя. Слава России.
So as you can see, him and his entire crew are currently hiding in a hole. This does have copyright music. This is a Russian assault on the city of Volodar. You can see these tank crews and armored vehicle crews are not doing very well. Short but sweet. And of course, we do have associated with that the New York Times article regarding the tank engagement there around the city. While, and as we had already reported there in the Daily Donetsk Oblast here, or the Daily Donetsk update, coming from Velkia Novosilka. I apologize, everybody. According to here in Velkia Novosilka, at least one person is dead after Russian shelling. It ended up striking their home, and while several other homes were damaged, it did not end up injuring anybody else, at least according to the report that we've found. Once again, coming from Pavel Korolenko, you can see the complete destruction of that house. I mean, there's nothing left of it, really. Completely destroyed, as well as several others around it. It's very severely damaged. The city of Zaporizhia saw a missile strike that occurred on the night of the 1st and late in the night of the 1st and early morning of the 2nd. The missile ended up impacting a 5-story apartment complex. At least 4 people thus far have been killed, with numerous others trapped underneath the rubble. Rescue operations do continue there, as the entire building was essentially destroyed. One person, her name being Katerina, who spent over 5 hours trapped underneath the rubble holding one of her 3 cats. The other 2 are reported missing, though a couple of them, though there are reports that they have thus far been found. So far, 3 separate animals have been recovered from the ruins. She's currently at a local hospital still looking for them, however. And you see the complete collapse of this building. The entire center part. Keep in mind, this is a 5-story apartment complex. 5-floor apartment complex. Completely reduced to rubble. The United Nations did end up sending response teams there. A lot of images and videos that have been coming out from this, of the different rescue work ongoing, from the different authorities there. This is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We've gone through President Zelensky and Stefanchuk and the Verkhovna Rada. As you see, these rescue workers, they have to carry ballistic vests. Because the reality is that here, the Russians use the double tap method, meaning that they will actually launch strikes in order to specifically hit first aid responders. This is coming from Elena Zelenska, the First Lady of Ukraine. Coming from the Ukrainian Red Cross, who is also providing immediate aid. Aminda Zepper. This is Katerina. That's her underneath the rubble. She took that photo from underneath the rubble, holding her cat. She did survive, and she is currently in the hospital. From come back alive or back and alive, depending on how you call them. This is a fundraising organization. It's actually one of the first ones that we actually had in the description. They've been operating in Ukraine since 2014. They provide non-lethal aid to military forces, including ballistics vests, predominantly. They have seriously branched out from there, including optics and other things. That video coming from Anton Jeroshenko. Coming from just across the Dnipro River here in Enerhodar, the ZNPP, or Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, once again has lost power temporarily. It was restored from our understanding. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, or ZNPP, located in Enerhodar, Zaporizhzhia Oblast, reportedly lost power after artillery fire reportedly damaged the last backup power line to the facility. This was reported by the permanent IAEA, or International Atomic Energy Agency, field team that's located at the facility. The ZNPP is Europe's largest nuclear power plant. It's the largest nuclear reactors in Europe. And a nuclear catastrophe there would be significantly worse than when Chernobyl's number 4 reactor ended up detonating in a safety test back in the 1980s. Additional concerns do plague the facility, though. And this has been recently raised by Rafael Mariano Grossi, who is the Director General of the IAEA, who stated that there was a very concerning trend of more Russian forces both in and around the power plant facility over the last several weeks. He said that the team has noticed a very large buildup of these security troops around the facility. On top of that, the Russians have delayed the rotation of the IAEA field team by over 3 weeks now. They should have been relieved 3 separate weeks ago, now 4 as of today. Though he was hoping that they would be relieved this week, it appears that that may no longer be happening. And so, as a result of this, he still continues to push for a UN controlled security and protection zone and nuclear safety zone around the ZNPP. And it's coming from the official Twitter of the International Atomic Energy Agency. They do go further here. He says, over the past few weeks, there's been an increasing security presence on the ZNPP site with the, quote, this is a concerning trend that shows urgency and importance of establishing a nuclear safety and security protection zone at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The Director General also expressed concerns about the continued delays in rotating the IAEA expert team currently at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant site, who should have been replaced over 3 weeks ago, and said he hoped that a rotation would finally take place later this week. Out of Kherson, Russian shelling continues to has actually struck a humanitarian line and does continue to strike humanitarian locations across the country. Russian shelling has increasingly targeted humanitarian distribution locations. Multiple attacks over the last several weeks have struck these sites around the country. The latest attacks being in the city of Kherson, where several people were injured after BM-21 Grad rockets struck nearby while they are waiting in line for humanitarian aid. Coming from the Ukrainian parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, which posted these photos. And a statement which has come from Denise Brown, the humanitarian coordinator for the United Nations there in Ukraine, who said, quote, I am grieved to hear the new strikes have once again killed and injured civilians in many parts of Ukraine over the past couple of days, including the attacks directly impacting homes or places where civilians are seeking assistance in the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions. It is also concerning that, again, volunteers and aid workers were injured while trying to support people enduring the horrors of this war. This must stop. International humanitarian law must be respected. So once again, even the United Nations having their workers be severely injured as a result of these attacks. But that is everything inside of the country of Ukraine. But that's not everything to deal with Ukraine. That's certainly not the end of it. And there's a lot of other news that is happening internationally as well. And we jump up here actually into Minsk, where we see the most guarded airbase in Belarus. The Belarusian airbase that has been used for the past year by the Russian military experienced a little security breach. This partisan drone was able to fly into the base, heavily protected by Russian air defense, and landed on a $3 million Beriev A-50U jet unnoticed. The drone entered the territory of the Machalutchi airfield several times. And this is the one that we reported on Monday regarding its being damaged. We do actually have a video of the drone now. Coming from Bipole. So this is the little quadcopter. Yep. This is a super heavily defended airfield. Very, very important military asset in Belarus. I mean, strategically important asset in Belarus. Just flies over the active runway, across the field, over the active runway, over the air control tower, over by the barracks in the staging area, right over the aircraft, and turns, looks at all the other jets, and just Plop. Yeah. So that's a thing. You can't make this stuff up very easily. Supposed to be, I mean, this is a very, there aren't a lot of these. I mean, AWACS aircraft, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of them for any military in the world. AWACS aircraft are extremely important and vital, and they play a very crucial part. But there are very, very intensive and very intensive to maintain and operate, and they're very expensive to build. Yeah, where's the air defense? No kidding. Where is anybody? Where's the guy at the air? Is the air controller asleep? Like, what is happening? Like, no one's even coming out there with like a pistol to shoot at this thing. Like, seriously? Like, you're not even gonna try. There is no concrete evidence of the damage on the plane on satellite. Though there is no concrete evidence of damage on the plane on satellite footage, it appears there's a new dark spot on its radar. The plane has been relocated and has not flown since the reported incident. So we can see this is on 219. This is on 228. So that could just be a camouflage scheme. It's possible. But it's definitely interesting, all things considered. And there has been a statement from the partisans as well, according to Bellingcat. Not so long ago, the dictator once again told his propagandists that he had the best air defense and the means against drones. Therefore, all military installations are allegedly in complete safety. What the situation really is clearly demonstrated by the video transmitted by the combat group and the members of the Paramoga plan. For 2 weeks, the Belarusian partisans conducted aerial reconnaissance at the Machalushki military airfield with the help of civilian drones purchased at the store. Now, one of the successful reconnaissance operations, the drone not only flew into the particular area of the specified airfield, flew near the Russian AWACS A-50U military aircraft, but even landed on its radar dish. Well, how did the vaunted means of the anti-drone warfare show themselves, for the development and the production of which tens of millions of rubles of budget funds were spent? The answer is obvious: no way. There was information about these incidents reported to the self-appointed ruler? Of course not. And that brings us into Russia, where we have really some of the more interesting things that have happened over the last really 24 hours. And that's because uninvited guests ended up showing up at the FSB's false flag operations. Both sides talked about false flags operations happening along the border prior to this event. And it was noted that the FSB would be going in and taking over a border security from the Russian military and border services. A day after Putin had announced this border security being taken over by the FSB, which was part of the suspected, considering the FSB are the ones that, lead these kinds of things, false flag efforts and spying and that kind of thing. The Russian Volunteer Corps freely crossed into Bryansk from Ukraine to film 2 videos addressing Russians.
Русского добровольческого корпуса записываем это видео из Брянской области. Мы пришли сюда не как ДРГ, а как освободительная армия на свою родную землю. В отличие от путинской армии, палачей и насильников, мы не воюем с мирными гражданами. Мы пришли сюда, чтобы вас освобождать. Призываем вас, возьмите оружие и боритесь с путинским, кремлевским, кровавым режимом. Слава РДК, смерть кремлевскому тирану. So
you can hear active fighting actually happening in the background of that video. Even more active fighting happening here.
Ну что ж, друзья, вот и свершилось. Русский добровольческий корпус перешел государственную границу Российской Федерации. Доказательства прямо за моей спиной. Мы не воюем с гражданскими, не убиваем безоружных. Имейте это в виду. Теперь пришло время обычным гражданам России понять, что они не рабы. Поднимайте бунт, сражайтесь. Ну что ж, друзья.
So, to kind of give you a little bit of a background on what's happening here. The Russian Volunteer Corps are not directly associated with the Ukrainian military. And they've been operating in Ukraine since August of 2022. Allegedly, the goal of the operation was to prevent a planned Russian false flag attack on the Bryansk region involving the killing of civilians. They are... So, this group, the Russian, this Russian unit here, the Russian Volunteer Corps, they are an openly extremist and very much a right-wing organization. Think the Azov battalions at the beginning of their formation, back in 2014. They're not associated with the Free Russian Legion, which was actually stood up by the Ukrainian government. This one was formed by somebody completely different. This is the head of the Russian Volunteer Corps is Denis Kaspusin, better known under his pseudonyms, and said that the Ukrainian authorities knew about the plans for the operation in the Bryansk region of the Russian Federation. According to him, otherwise it simply could not have happened. Kaspusin said that there was about 45 people participating in the operation. The Russian Volunteer Corps arrived in the village that had already been cleared for the FSB operation just an hour before the arranged time, filming their own address and leaving before the FSB realized their show was stolen. In the midst of confusion, having Putin's address about an act of terrorism has gone live.
Сегодня совершили очередной террористический акт, очередное преступление. Проникли на приграничную территорию и открыли огонь по гражданским лицам. Видели, что это гражданская машина. Видели, что там сидят гражданские лица и дети. Нивы обыкновенные. Открыли огонь по ним. Вот именно такие люди и ставили перед собой задачу лишить нас исторической памяти, лишить нас своей истории, лишить нас своих традиций, языка. Сегодня совершили очередной.
The Russian media has begun to spin this mission as an act of terrorism by claiming that 2 civilians were killed during this operation. Oddly enough, the perpetrators destroyed the license plate of the vehicle itself. According to TASS, if you look, for whatever reason, they ripped the license plate off of it. Right there. Putin is expected to hold a meeting with permanent members of the Security Council in connection with the sabotage of the Bryansk region. And it will be held behind closed doors, and this is according to Peskov. So, there's been a lot of talk about this. Is it a false flag operation? Is it not a false flag operation? What is going on? How is it happening? And the truth is that we, with what all has happened, we were kind of been hoping that there would be a little bit more clarification that popped up regarding this. And this is something that is one of the reasons why it took so long to get up and running tonight, because there had to be a lot of discussion about this. And, because it wasn't clear everything that had happened, how it had happened. And so we needed to really sit down as a team, me and the head researcher, Fair, who's also able to verify all of this stuff because they speak both Ukrainian and Russian fluently. And So the thing is that this individual, this Kasputin, also known as White Rex, is his call sign. As I was saying earlier, the Russian Volunteer Corps is not the Russian Legion. In fact, they had a meeting on 31. They had a press conference with the Russian Legion on the 31st of August of 2022. And at this press conference, they talked about possibly, bringing a political center and everything up, jointly running a political center for their group, for their groups, because they, are after a common goal, and that is to fight the Russian Federation. They don't see the Russian Federation as, as they want to liberate their homeland. They see the Putin regime, right? And so the groups, however, this group, the Russian Volunteer Corps, was stood up in August of 2022 from right-wing members of units that have been fighting since 2014, that have been fighting alongside Ukrainians since 2014, and things such as the Azov Regiment, which at the beginning of the Azov formation, the Azov was also a right-wing paramilitary group. It was folded into the Ukrainian military formally, and at that point there was a lot of people that were actually removed from that unit, and it was cleared out of a lot of people that were those right-wing neo-Nazi members that they became very noted for in the beginning of their history. But Ukraine also really didn't have an army because they had just had a revolution at that point. Those same individuals that would have been in those units and in those paramilitary groups, those right-wing paramilitary groups, the Russians from those groups formed this unit in August. So they do operate alongside the Territorial Defense Unit, but they weren't stood up and they weren't folded in with those units like the Azov were, because that took a significant amount of time. The leader of this unit, the Denis Kapustin, he is actually very openly been a neo-Nazi. So we do know that about him. Very much a right-wing conservative politically, and very much a neo-Nazi. So that is something that we have all noted. It's very confusing. It's very weird. Something like this probably would have never been greenlit. Both Ukraine formally thus far has denied that this has happened. That's not to say that they don't necessarily support the action of partisan work, because we also know that this unit, they have also been the ones conducting the partisan work inside of the Bryansk Oblast, with including the destruction of railway and communications lines. So we do know that this isn't the first time that they have struck the Bryansk Oblast. Certainly not the first time that they've been operating in here. It's just the first time it's been so open about it, and that we do know kind of who is here in this unit and what's kind of happening with this unit, what their goals are. So very interesting story, very confusing story, and we're hoping to get more clarification here at some point in the future to kind of revisit and be able to talk about this in a little bit better depth, because it's confusing. It was confusing for us trying to put this thing together, and I know and I understand that it is very confusing for people that, for you as the viewer, who may not understand some of these groups or look into some of these groups or not know who these people are, what groups they're from, or why they're doing certain things. And I myself for a little bit thought this was the Free Russian Legion who was doing that until I got better information. So hopefully we can clarify that some more. We jump over here into Moscow, where we're seeing, question of too much censorship. The owner of the Wagner mercenary group has appealed to the Russian State Duma not to outlaw constructive criticism. The law criminalizes discrediting participants of the Russian special military operation. This comes in light of Prigozhin's recent criticisms of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Coming from Medusa, who has an article on this. While just outside of Moscow, the local suburb, this is in Kolomna, Locals have reported large explosions near Kolomna. Local residents in the Moscow suburb of Kolomna have reported large explosions. It is unknown as the cause, however, partisan activity may have struck one of several ammunition storage sites within the region. The Russian military has stated that there was no signs of explosions despite recent reports. That giant glowing light in the night sky really tells me otherwise.
Ну вот, минут 10 тому назад свист был слышен, потом взрыв явно. И вот в районе свалки, ну, не знаю, передаст, не передаст видео. Сначала был дым, сейчас вот такое вот зарево. Как-то так.
Coming from a camera there in Kolomna. Jumping over here into the rest of Europe, we come over here to Germany, where 2 are critically injured in a recent shooting. An 81-year-old man critically injured one person in the northwestern town of Bromsch on Tuesday before critically injuring himself with the weapon. Both the shooter and the victim were brought to the hospital by helicopter and are receiving medical treatment. While coming out of Geneva, a high-level pledging event for a humanitarian situation in Yemen is currently ongoing. On February 27th, the governments of Sweden, Switzerland, and the UN OCHA invited donors to participate in a high-level pledging event for Yemen in Geneva. The pledge reached $1.16 billion USD, which is only 27% of the $4.34 billion appealed by the UN. The European Union has pledged $468 million to support humanitarian work as well. In Serbia, Serbia continues to distance itself from Russia. Serbia's President Alexander Vučić has said that his compatriots who were members of Russia's Wagner PMC and fought against Ukraine will be arrested after they return home. This is coming from Politico. Also, more information has been revealed recently showing that Serbia has been selling their stockpiles to Ukraine despite their anti-war stance, including grad rockets, which reportedly come from Serbian stockpiles that have popped up inside of the country of Ukraine. They could be doing this over, they could be ending up doing this through third-party activities, as we've seen done by other countries before. Moldova has changes the language of official documents to Romanian. After a historic vote, all official legislation in Moldova will be in the Romanian language. Moldovan language is a term invented by the Soviets when they annexed the land today it recognizes Moldova. It is nearly indistinguishable from Romanian tongue. During the consideration of the bill, deputies from opposition bloc of communists and socialists came out with posters, Moldovan, Moldovans, Moldovan.
De stat a Republicii Moldova nu are și nu va avea vreodată ideologie oficială. Limba oficială a Republicii Moldova este limba română. Limba română este cea care trebuie să ne unească. Limba română niciodată nu trebuie să dezbine. Moldova!
Gheorghe, te rog frumos, colegi, vă rog să reveniți la locurile voastre. Colegi, eu vă rog frumos încetați.
And as you can see, it got rather heated. In Greece, unfortunately, a train crash has killed at least 57 people, with more than 80 others injured after a head-on collision between a freight train and a passenger train late on Tuesday, which officials said was mainly due to human error. The crash occurred shortly before midnight in the town of Tempe along the Athens-Thessaloniki route of the entrance to the Vale of Tempe. The two trains were running towards each other on the same track, and the force of the high-speed collision derailed multiple cars, with some bursting into flames. At least 150 firefighters, including some specialized units, and 40 ambulances responded to the scene with the assistance of 32 police officers and 15 patrol vehicles. Absolutely horrific. This news article was actually sent in by White Raven there on the Discord. In Georgia, protests in Georgia after a controversial law has been approved. In Georgia, there are protests against the adoption of a law on the creation of a register of agents of foreign influence, similar to the Russian one that currently exists. The document stipulates that foreign agents will be non-commercial organizations and mass media, more than 20% of those whose annual income is foreign financing. Refusal to register with the Register of Foreign Agents, according to the draft law, entails a fine up to very significant amounts. Jumping down here and into Israel, we come over to Tel Aviv, where protests in Israel escalated into clashes with police. Demonstrators blocked several streets in Tel Aviv on March 1st during a protest against judicial reform. The police used water cannons and stun grenades. At least 11 protesters were taken to the hospital. Unfortunately, these protests do follow suit of a lot of violence that has been ongoing, and tensions continue to flare up there inside of Israel. That's pretty bad. I'm just gonna point this out. That's really bad control of your weapons there, guys. Like really bad control of the weapons. Well, especially those rifles. Those IDF guys had absolutely no control of their weapons, other than the fact that it was slung around their body. Not the place to not have make absolute control of a firearm. Israel's death penalty for terrorist bill has passed the initial Knesset vote. According to the Jerusalem Post, the majority of the opposition, led by former Prime Minister Yair Lapid, was absent from the vote in protest. Protests broke out throughout the country. So that's not a sound grenade, as is described here. That is a stinger grenade. So if you notice, as this thing busts open, see a lot of stuff spraying out of it. That's because that's not meant for sound. That is a stinger grenade, and that is filled with a lot of like little BBs, essentially. They're rubber pellets that are inside of this thing, and it acts like kind of like a frag grenade, except it just peppers everyone around it. And it's non-lethal. Benjamin Netanyahu's wife, Sarah Netanyahu, has been evacuated from a hair salon in Tel Aviv as thousands of protesters blocked her way out of the salon. So that is the updates there regarding Israel. And as we jump down here and into Saudi Arabia, wow. Saudi authorities foiled an attempt to smuggle over 2 million Captagon pills. This was an interesting number to figure up, and once again put me on yet another list, I am sure. Authorities in Saudi Arabia foiled an attempt to smuggle over 2,015,116 Captagon pills hidden in containers shaped as tomatoes and pomegranates. The official Saudi press agency, or SPA, reported this on Friday, and this comes out to over 1 ton of pills. So this comes just a little over after a month after 3 million Captagon pills were discovered, also in Saudi Arabia. The Zakat Tax and Customs Authority, or Zatka, seized the drugs from a truck at the Al Haditha border crossing. The drug is known to come from Syria and transit through Lebanon in cargo such as fruit and vegetables. So, for those that are wondering, yeah, so they look like they're supposed to be tomatoes. They're not tomatoes. They're just a ton of pills. It's a very popular drug in the Middle East. Most of the bootleg versions aren't an exact science, but the actual Captagon was produced and is produced in very limited quantities and usage, banned in many places. But the point of Captagon is that it is a mixture between, my understanding is fentanyl. It's a mixture between fentanyl, amphetamines, and with bootleg versions more so caffeine. So it's very much a very big upper, and they come out to about, usually the dosage is about 500 milligram pills. Don't ask me how I found that one out. And that's how we got our tonnage. So over a ton of essentially fentanyl amphetamines coming into the country of Saudi Arabia. The Gulf of Oman, just off the country of Oman here, the U.S. and British Navies intercepted weapons going from Iran to Yemen once again. The U.S. and British Navies intercepted another batch of weapons from Iran to Yemen, and the incident occurred on February the 23rd in the Gulf of Oman. British sailors detained a small vessel on board, which were Iranian anti-tank guided missiles, the Delaveh, also known as similar to the Russian Kornet rocket, which is an anti-tank guided missile similar to the TOW missile. According to the Pentagon, the weapons were intended for the Iranian-backed militants of the Shiite movement Ansar Allah. Over the past 3 months, this is the 7th suppression of arms smuggling into the country of Yemen. This is coming from the United States Central Command. The U.S. Central Command supported the maritime interdiction on February 23rd. On February 23rd, it resulted in the seizure of partner naval forces of weapons that originated in Iran and were bound for Yemen. The interdiction by the Royal Navy frigate HMS Lancaster took place in the Gulf of Oman along routes historically used to traffic weapons unlawfully from Iran to Yemen. Critical advanced Iranian missile components, as well as advanced Iranian anti-tank guided missiles, were recovered from the stateless craft. General Michael Eric Kurilla, commander of the CENTCOM, called the United Kingdom's Lieutenant General Charlie Strickland, British Chief of Joint Operations, to commend the Royal Navy on its professionalism and dedication to regional peace and stability. We laud our partner forces who continue to interdict the flow of munitions at sea, said Kurilla. Iran remains the most destabilizing actor in the region. Security of the seas and limiting the free flow of Iranian munitions is critical to the regional security and stability. And that is a point that many people don't understand, unfortunately. Iran, it is beneficial for Iran if this region is not stable. And so Iran supports the Houthi rebels there in Yemen that overthrew the Yemeni government because it allows them to fight Saudi Arabia, which is politically and religiously different from Iran. They are two different sectors of Islam. Saudi Arabia and Iran are, and so what you end up seeing is they are basically fighting it out in Yemen. Iran using it much more of a proxy. Similarly, Iran also supports Kataib Hezbollah militants. They're all Hezbollah militants throughout the Middle East, essentially. They actually smuggle fighters. They smuggle foreign fighters into Syria and Iraq. Were used to train insurgents on how to kill American vehicles, American forces, such as the improvised explosive projectile, or IEP. Many of the IED designs that were developed there in the country of Iraq were actually of Iranian origin, trained at Iranian camps. When I was in Baghdad, Kataib Hezbollah, those were Iranian supplied Katyushas that were shelling us. And the individual that we killed there, who's the commander of the Quds Force, if you may remember, it was General Al-Soleimani. I was there for that. We ended up killing him in a predator strike. That's because Kataib Hezbollah was getting ready to. They had breached the outside of the embassy. They're preparing for a final attack under Iranian direction, is what occurred there. And the only issue I have with us killing him is the fact we couldn't do it twice. When I was in Syria, there was over 70,000 Iranian fighters. So it's a very difficult situation. Iran is constantly trying to destabilize efforts. They're trying to destabilize the Iraqi government. They back Muqtada al-Sadr, who is he fought us as an insurgency during the Iraq War, but he also is constantly trying to overthrow the Iraqi government. So, definitely not a very good nation. They're also trying to develop nuclear weapons, which also isn't okay. Because we didn't need that to start with. We don't need more people who also want to cause a lot of issues in a region also having nuclear weapons. That doesn't mix well. Coming from Pakistan, 4 TTP commanders were killed. And an explosion is reported in the restaurant in the Afghan city of Khost, where the members... Sorry, this is in Khost, Afghanistan. I apologize. An explosion was reported in the restaurant in the Afghan city of Khost, where members of the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, were allegedly located. There's information about the death of 4 commanders of the group and 2 versions of what happened. Some believe that it was a drone strike and others an explosion inside the restaurant. Taliban cordoned off the scene, preventing anyone from accessing it. And we do see that Taliban cordon. In Hong Kong, a 42-story skyscraper caught fire. A major fire erupted in a skyscraper construction site in Hong Kong's popular shopping district on Thursday night, sending burning debris down to the street below. The blaze broke out at the site of the Mariners Club redevelopment project in densely populated Siem Sha Su district at about 11 p.m. local time. Wooden floors of the building were engulfed in flames, as was the bamboo scaffolding, sending burning debris through the air, flying through the air as firefighters worked to contain the blaze. 2 people, believed to be motorists, were taken to Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Yam Mui Tay for treatment. While in Malaysia, at least 6 states have been affected by heavy rainfall. This heavy rainfall and flooding is due to, or has led to at least 1 person being killed and another 26,000 who have had to become evacuated. Similarly, widespread flooding was triggered by heavy rainfall in the Northern Territory of Australia. Well, at least 700 people have had to be evacuated from Dagaragu, Kalkarinji, Pigeonhole, and Palumpa in Victoria Daly region due to the floods and overflow of the Victoria River. I apologize for butchering that for anyone listening from Australia. Come down here and into Africa, where between Madagascar and the mainland there of Mozambique, deaths and casualties due to the tropical cyclone continue to rise. Tropical Cyclone Freddy passed through Madagascar from February 21st and 22nd, and Mozambique on the 24th and 25th, leading to 7 and 10 deaths respectively. 390,000 people have been affected across the 2 countries, and heavy rain and strong winds are expected over southern Madagascar over the next 3 days. While in Somalia, the fighting does still continue. At least 210 people have died and 680 have been injured, with about 200,000 families being forced to flee during the ongoing clashes around the city of Las Kanud. On February the 10th, 2023, the Somaliland authorities declared a ceasefire, but soon resumed military operations under the pretext of attacks on them by federal forces. Medicines Sans Frontieres said the hospital it supports in La Sanad has been shelled 4 times in the past 3 weeks. This further exacerbates the already difficult humanitarian situation racking the country. Damage to that hospital, unfortunately. Near Rwanda, near Rwanda, the Congolese M23 rebels have captured yet another key town of North Kivu province after days of fighting. The fighting was disregarded was a disregard of a ceasefire demand by regional leaders. In the event of the capture of 2 more cities than Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, will be in a state of siege. That is, all paths leading to the city will be cut. In order to avoid such a development of events, the authorities promised to make efforts to give the enemy a worthy rebuff. For this, ground and air forces have thus far been involved.
Kene kubetela kuna. Yo zangu te. Hey, wana si abeti.
Kaka place yango.
In Sudan, near Khartoum, dengue fever has broken out once again. On Wednesday, near Khartoum state declared a first ever dengue fever outbreak with 533 confirmed cases and 928 suspected cases. The outbreak has followed the cessation of regular insecticide spraying amid the deteriorating economy there in the country. And in Mali, a major clash between JNIM and Islamic State militants has occurred. The Al-Qaeda-linked Jamaat Nasrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, or JNIM, has announced a major clash with the Islamic State in Mali. Jihadists killed more than 60 Islamic State fighters in a shootout on March the 1st in Manaka district, according to the statement by JNIM. Islamic State has so far remained silent on the incident happening there in Mali. Turning from the JNIM official announcement. Of course, they released photos. The 1995 Toyota Hilux with a Dishka mounted on the back of it. A classic. So it was manhandling a PKM machine gun. And of course, more rifle fire there. Down here, in Argentina, fires are leaving millions without electricity. Power has largely been restored in Argentina after more than half of the country was left without electricity for several hours. More than 20 million people in major cities and large swaths of the countryside were affected on Wednesday. The blackout is believed to have been caused by the large fire in open fields west of the capital, Buenos Aires. The blaze brought down crucial power lines and forced a nuclear power station to be taken offline. The blackout comes in the middle of the heat wave and drought in Argentina, with temperatures consistently above 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit in some parts of the country. Ah, nice. I was muted. I gotta love it. So, thanks to Delta Aviation 23, we do have some more stuff on this. We do have a bonus here. So, this is actually an aid package that was announced today by the U.S. Department of Defense regarding more security assistance to Ukraine. We will be getting this added to the news. And so far, an additional, what they are projecting to be, or what they are providing at this point, is a $400 million total on this drawdown, with additional HIMARS ammunition, or ammunition for the 155 or 777s, as well as the M109 Paladins, 105 millimeter artillery munitions, 25 millimeter munitions. That's likely to prepare for the introduction for the Bradley to actually start to see some fighting there. Some very interesting stuff. So this, what we're really seeing is likely this is being prepared for the offensives that are going to be taking place here in the spring. And so the 25 millimeter ammunition, they're going to run through a lot of it while on the offensive. But you also are going to see those armored vehicle launched bridges. So these are bridges that can be used to cross, different rivers there in Ukraine, and to allow for forces to cross it, including armored forces, and be able to be deployed in a relatively quick manner. Pontoon bridges, essentially, their equivalent. And except these are deployed literally on an armored vehicle. It's really cool to see. Demolition munitions and equipment for obstacle clearing. We're looking at things like Kremenna and Zvotove, where we see very heavy buildup of defensive lines. It's going to become very important when you're talking about trying to maneuver armored forces, especially with cheap things like Czech hedgehogs and the Dragon's Teeth, which have been put in place. Though the Dragon's Teeth won't be as much of an issue, Czech hedgehogs are always an issue and are actually very reliable, even the old ones. At the beginning of the war, you can learn Czech hedgehog is literally a bunch of I-beams welded together. They suck. Testing and diagnostic equipment for support, vehicle maintenance, and repair. Because given all these armored vehicles and everything that's being provided, you have to be able to support the maintenance that comes along with it. Because these things are going to break down. They're going to get damaged. There's always going to be issues. These are more temperamental than like a 2003 car that you've had for about the last 10 years and put about 400,000 miles on it. You can't just ignore that check engine light and turn the music up a little bit more. These things are very temperamental. They're very, very difficult, and they require very extensive maintenance to keep running and keep into a combat condition. So you need the stuff to continue to be able to better diagnose that, make it faster to repair, better to identify the problem, and to actually get the parts that you need. And of course, that comes with, as I said, spare parts and other field equipment. So things to repair it, things to maneuver it. The thing about most NATO equipment is the fact that everything should be, for the most part, anything that should be able to go wrong should also be able to be repaired in the field. And that is kind of the whole point of, at least for the military doctrine for the United States, and therefore how NATO also structures a lot of it, is the Abrams tank, for example, and the Bradleys, for the most part, they're completely repairable in the field. All you have to do if you have an issue with the engine on your tank, the whole engine, you literally unhook a couple of lines and you just pick up the engine out of the Abrams and then drop in a new one. It is that simple, and it can be done in the field. It takes I think about like 2 hours or something like that to drop in, to just take out the engine, drop in a new one, and you're good to go. And that goes for many, many different things on these vehicles. They're designed to be able to fight far from any major maintenance support. And that's lessons that the United States especially, but other nations learned is going to be required to fight large wars in the future, when it comes to logistically. It's a very hard lesson that was learned during World War II, and it's the same kind of lessons that we carry over even into today. And you can see those maintenance effectiveness there and throughout the last 30 years in the war on terror, but even now as we're supplying things to Ukraine, and you can see how that kind of a package deal really works out. But that is the last of the hard-hitting news, but we do have one last news point here, and this is coming from the Great Pyramid of Giza, where yet another secret corridor has been revealed. The Egyptian antiquity officials have confirmed the existence of a hidden corridor above the main entrance to the Great Pyramid of Giza that dates back some 4,500 years. Corridor is located on the northern side of the Pyramid of Khufu, who was first detected in 2016 using an imaging technique called muography. Located above the main entrance of the pyramid, it measures nearly 30 feet in length and over 6 feet wide. The discovery was announced by Egyptian archaeologist Zaya Hawass, who is the country's Minister for Tourism, and the country's Minister of Tourism, Ahmed Issa, on Thursday at the unveiling ceremony outside the pyramid, and credited the team of scientists with the Scan Pyramids Project, an international program that uses non-invasive technology to look at unexplored sections of ancient structures. Would you see this announcement coming from Reuters?
And here we are. This is the corridor. This is
Looking forward, and he says, "Don't open the door." So that's the corridor. So they think. So this is kind of like showing you, how this looks essentially on the inside. They think that this corridor is. They think that there may be a chamber with it, but for the most part, what they're thinking is this is actually a structural design that is meant to help support the weight of the rest of the pyramid, essentially. They think that several corridors have to be made to actually provide structural support. It's not just a solid structure, right? It's not just solid rocks piled on top of each other the whole time. There is actually a system of tunnels and things, and so there has to be some kind of supporting structure inside of this, and they think that corridor may actually be part of that support structure, and it may also have an associated chamber that hasn't been discovered, because if you're going to have the corridor, you might as well use some more space. Is pretty much how that kind of went. So very interesting. It's very interesting that Khufu's pyramid here is now has a new corridor, and there's probably many other discoveries to go through here. I mean, these things have. I mean, there's a lot to these. Ancient Egypt has a lot of history, and a lot of things that still are being discovered. And as we can tell, despite how many people have gone over the Khufu's grave there, his great pyramid of Giza, at the end of the day, there's still a lot more to be done. And I agree with Bookham 40. As much as I would like to see what's behind it, I really do not. Considering everything else going on in the world, do not open the door. Let's wait till the rest of the world settles down, folks. Then open the door. With that is everything that has happened in the news over the last 96 hours, at least according to our sources. I hope that you guys found this maybe not enjoyable, but at least knowledgeable. And I hope that you guys are spurred to do something good to help people throughout the world. And so please be sure, if you are able to, check out the video description below and check out all of the wonderful organizations that are listed down there. And please give as much support as you can to them. They are doing amazing work, and 70% or more of the donations that they receive go to their programs, meaning they go to helping people, while 30% or less go to things such as salaries and administration's costs. If you have more, please reach out to a staff member. We're always looking to expand that list, and we're always willing to get some more organizations that we can help more people with. And if you can't give a lot to them, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Help us grow this project. This only works because of you guys. And help us grow this. That like and subscribe, sharing this amongst your community, it really does help the channel. And we want to be able to do some amazing things in the future. And we can only do that with your guys' support. And thank you very much for all the support you've already given us. But with that, my name is Paul from the New News. I hope that you guys have a fantastic rest of your night. I hope that you, your family, and your friends remain safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. I hope that you guys will join us once again tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Or, sorry, tomorrow night at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Central, for another 24 hours of news and review. Until then, have a fantastic and a wonderful, safe rest of your night, everybody. Bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до повноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлейфуємо. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до повноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновах і чутно кличіть, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ. Going home, Russian soldiers, going